Okay, tonight is the 5th of August 2011, and this is the 20th night. We're speaking on the Digha, Nikaya Suttas. Tonight we come to Sutta number 25, Udumbarika Sihanada Sutta. The great lions roar to the Udumbarikans. Thus have I heard. Once the Lord was staying in Rajagaha at the Vulture's Peak, and at that time the wanderer Nigroda was staying at the Udumbarika lodging for wanderers, with a large company of some 3,000 wanderers. And one morning early the householder Sandana came to Rajagaha in order to see the Lord. Then he thought, it is not the proper time to see the blessed Lord. He is in retreat. It is not the proper time to see the meditating monks. They are in retreat. Perhaps I should go to the Udumbarika lodging for wanderers and call on Nigroda. And he did so. And just then Nigroda was sitting in the midst of a large crowd of wanderers who were all shouting and screaming and making a great clamour and indulging in various kinds of unedifying conversation about kings, robbers, ministers, armies, dangers, war, food, drink, clothes, beds, garlands, perfumes, relatives, carriages, villages, towns and cities, countries, women, heroes, street and well gossip, talk of the departed, desultory chat, speculation about land and sea, talk of being and non-being. Then Nigroda saw Sandana approaching from a distance, and he called his followers to order, saying, "Be quiet, gentlemen. Don't make a noise, gentlemen. The householder Sandana, a follower of the ascetic Gotama, is approaching. He is one of the number of white-robed householder followers of the ascetic Gotama in Rajagaha. And these good folk are fond of quiet. They are taught to be quiet and speak in praise of quiet. If he sees that this company is quiet, he will most likely want to come and visit us." At this, the wanderers fell silent. Then Sandana approached Nigroda and exchanged courtesies with him, and then sat down to one side. Then he said, "Reverend sirs, the way the wanderers of another faith conduct themselves when they come together is one thing. They make a great clamour and indulge in all manner of unedifying conversation, etc. The Blessed Lord's way is different. He seeks a lodging in the forest, in the depths of the jungle, free from noise, with little sound, far from the madding crowd, undisturbed by men, well fitted for seclusion." Then Nigroda replied, "Well now, householder, do you know whom the ascetic Gotama talks to? Whom does he converse with? From whom does he get his lucidity of wisdom? The ascetic Gotama's wisdom is destroyed by the solitary life. He is unused to assemblies. He is no good at conversation. He is right out of touch. Just as bison, circling round, keep to the fringes, so it is with the ascetic Gotama. In fact, householder, if the ascetic Gotama were to come to this assembly, we would baffle him with a single question. We would knock him over like an empty pot." Now the Lord, with his divine ear faculty, purified and surpassing human range, heard this exchange between Sandana and Nigroda, and descending from Vulture's Peak, he came to the peacock's feeding ground beside the Summa Gada tank, and walked up and down there in the open air. Then Nigroda caught sight of him and called his company to order, saying, "Gentlemen, be quiet, be less noisy. The ascetic Gotama is walking up and down beside the Summa Gada tank. He is fond of quiet and speaks in praise of quiet. If he sees that this company is quiet, he will most likely want to come and visit us. If he does so, we will put this question to him: Lord, what is this doctrine in which the Blessed Lord trains his disciples, and which those disciples whom he has so trained as to benefit from it recognize as their principal support and the perfection of the holy life?" At this, the wanderers were silent. Then the Lord approached Nigroda, and Nigroda said, "Come, Blessed Lord, welcome, Blessed Lord. At last the Blessed Lord has gone out of his way to come here. Be seated, Lord. A seat is prepared." The Lord sat down on the prepared seat. And Nigroda took a low stool and sat down to one side. Then the Lord said to him, Nigroda, what was the subject of your conversation just now? What talk have I interrupted? Nigroda replied, Lord, we saw the Blessed Lord walking up and down at the peacock's feeding ground by the Sumagada tank, and we thought, if the ascetic Gautama were to come here, we could ask him this question, Lord, what is this doctrine in which the Blessed Lord trains his disciples, and which those disciples whom he has so trained as to benefit from it recognize as their principal support and the perfection of the holy life? And the Buddha said, Nigroda, it is hard for you, holding different views, being of different inclinations, and subject to different influences, following a different teacher, to understand the doctrine which I teach my disciples. Come on then, Nigroda, ask me about your own teaching, about your extreme austerity. How are the conditions of austerity and self-mortification fulfilled, and how they are not fulfilled? At this the wanderers made a great commotion and noise, exclaiming, It is wonderful, it is marvelous, how great are the powers of the ascetic Gautama in holding back with his own theories and in inviting others to discuss theirs. Silencing them, Nigroda said, Lord, we teach the higher austerities, we regard them as essential, we adhere to them. Such being the case, what constitutes their fulfillment or non-fulfillment? And the Buddha said, suppose, Nigroda, a self-mortifier goes naked, uses no polite restraints, licks his hand, does not come or stand still when requested. He does not accept food out of the pot or pan, etc., as in Sutta number 8, verse 14. He wears coarse hem or mixed material, shrouds from corpses, rags from the dust heap. He is a plucker out of hair and beard, devoted to this practice. He is a covered thorn man, making his bed on them, sleeping alone in a garment of wet mud, living in the open air, accepting whatever seed is offered, one who drinks no water and is addicted to the practice, or he dwells intent on the practice of going to bed 3 times before evening. What do you think, Nigroda? Is the higher austerity thereby fulfilled or not? And Nigroda said, Indeed, Lord, it is fulfilled. And the Buddha said, But Nigroda, I maintain that this higher austerity can be faulted in various ways. Stop here for a moment. You see these self-mortifiers, they go naked and then they pluck their hair and the beard out. Instead of shaving it, they pluck it out, which is more painful. And then he sleeps on the thorns, covered thorns, and then sleep in a garment of wet mud or in the open air. Some of them drink no water, and then some of them, when the sun goes down, they go and submerge themselves in the river 3 times to wash away their sins. All these austerities just to punish the body. They think that's the way to purify themselves by cultivating all sorts of these ascetic practices. Then Nigroda asked, In what way, Lord, do you maintain that it can be faulted? And the Buddha said, Take the case, Nigroda, of a self-mortifier who practices a certain austerity. As a result, he is pleased and satisfied at having attained his end. And this is a fault in that self-mortifier. Or else in so doing he elevates himself and disparages others. And this is a fault in that self-mortifier. Or else he has become intoxicated with conceit, infatuated and therefore careless. And this is a fault in that self-mortifier. Again, a self-mortifier practices a certain austerity, and this brings him gains, honors and fame. As a result, he is pleased and satisfied at having attained his end. Or else he elevates himself and disparages others. Or else he becomes intoxicated with conceit, infatuated and therefore careless. And this is a fault in that self-mortifier. Again, a self-mortifier practices a certain austerity, and he divides his food into 2 heaps, saying, This suits me, that doesn't suit me. And what does not suit him, he eagerly rejects, while what suits him, he eats up greedily, recklessly and passionately, not seeing the peril, with no thought for the consequences. And this is a fall in the self-mortifier. Again, a self-mortifier practices a certain austerity for the sake of gains, honours and fame, thinking, kings and their ministers will honour me, Katyas and Brahmins and householders and religious teachers. And this is a fall in the self-mortifier. Again, a self-mortifier disparages some ascetic or Brahmins, saying, see how he lives in abundance, eating all sorts of things. Whether propagated from roots, from stems, from joints, from cuttings, or fifthly from seeds, he chews them all up with the thunderbolt of a jaw of his, and they call him an ascetic. And this is a fall in the self-mortifier. Or he sees another ascetic or Brahmin being made much of by families, being honoured and respected and worshipped, and he thinks, they make much of that rich liver, they honour him, respect him and worship him, whereas I, who am a real ascetic and self-mortifier, gets no such treatment. Thus he is envious and jealous because of those householders. And this is a fall in that self-mortifier. Again, a self-mortifier sits in a prominent position, and this is a fall in that self-mortifier. Or he goes round ostentatiously, showing off, among the families, as if to say, see, this is my way of renunciation, and this is a fall in the self-mortifier. Or he behaves in an underhand way, on being asked, do you approve of this? Although he does not approve, he says, I do. Or although he does approve, he says, I do not. In this way, he becomes a conscious liar, and this is a fall in that self-mortifier. Again, a self-mortifier, when the Tathagata or a disciple of the Tathagata presents the Dhamma in a way that should command his assent, withholds that assent, and this is a fall in that self-mortifier. Or he is angry and bad-tempered, and this is a fall in that self-mortifier. Or he is mean and spiteful, envious and jealous, crafty and deceitful, obstinate and proud, with evil desires and under their sway, with wrong views and given to extremist opinions. He is tainted with worldliness, holding on firmly, unwilling to give up. And this is a fall in that self-mortifier. What do you think, Nigroda? Are these things false in the higher austerity or not? And Nigroda said, certainly they are, Lord. It could happen that a single self-mortifier was possessed of all these faults, not to speak of just one or the other. And then the Buddha continued. Now Nigroda, take the case of a certain self-mortifier who practices a certain austerity. As a result, he is not pleased and satisfied at having attained his end. This being so, in this respect he is purified. Again, he does not elevate himself and disparage others. Similarly with the other examples given before. Thus he does not become a conscious liar. In this respect he is purified. Again, a self-mortifier, when the Tathagata or a disciple of the Tathagata presents the Dhamma in a way that should command his assent, gives his assent. In this respect he is purified. And he is not angry or bad-tempered. In this respect he is purified. And he is not mean and spiteful, envious and jealous, crafty and deceitful, obstinate and proud. He is without evil desires and not under their sway, without wrong views and not given to extremist opinions. He is not tainted with worldliness, does not hold on firmly, and is not unwilling to give up. In this respect, he is purified. What do you think, Nigroda? Is the higher austerity purified by these things or not? And Nigroda said, certainly it is, Lord. It attains its peak there, penetrating to the pith. And the Buddha said, no, Nigroda, it does not attain its peak there, penetrating to the pith. It has only reached the outer bark. And then the Nigroda asked, well then, Lord, how does austerity attain its peak, penetrating to the pith? It would be good if the Blessed Lord were to cause my austerity to attain its peak, to penetrate to the pith. Stop here for a moment. After you see, the Buddha is leading this Nigroda to ask him these questions. And then the Buddha slowly teaches him what he wants to know, what the Buddha teaches his disciples, the higher path. Then the Buddha said, Nigroda, take the case of a self-mortifier who observes the fourfold restraint. And what is this? Here, a self-mortifier does not harm a living being, does not cause a living being to be harmed, does not approve of such harming. He does not take what is not given, or cause it to be taken, or approve of such taking. He does not tell a lie, or cause a lie to be told, or approve of such lying. He does not crave for sense pleasures, cause others to do so, or approve of such craving. In this way, a self-mortifier observes the fourfold restraint, and through this restraint, through making this his austerity, he takes an upward course and does not fall back into lower things. Stop here for a moment. Here, basically, the Buddha is talking about the 4 precepts: not to kill, not to take what is not given, not to commit sexual misconduct, and not to lie. But you see, the Buddha put it in a way that he suits this ascetic. The Buddha calls it the fourfold restraint, because for these ascetics, they have a lot of restraints. They use the word restraint instead of precept. Then he finds a solitary lodging at the root of a forest tree, in a mountain cave or gorge, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, or in the open air on a heap of straw. Then, having eaten after his return from the alms round, he sits down cross-legged, holding his body erect, having established mindfulness before him. Abandoning hankering for the world, he dwells with a mind freed from such hankering, and his mind is purified of it. Abandoning ill will and hatred, he dwells with a mind freed from them, and by compassionate love for the welfare of all living beings, his mind is purified of them. Abandoning sloth and torpor, by the perception of light, mindful and clearly aware, his mind is purified of sloth and torpor. Abandoning restlessness and worry, and with an inwardly calm heart, his mind is purified of restlessness and worry. Abandoning doubt, he dwells with doubt left behind, without uncertainty as to what things are wholesome. His mind is purified of doubt. Having abandoned these 5 hindrances, and in order to weaken by insight the defilements of mind, he dwells, letting his mind fill with loving kindness, pervade 1 quarter, then a second, then a third, then a 4th quarter. And so he continues to pervade the whole wide world, above, below, across and everywhere, with the mind filled with loving kindness, extensive, developed, measureless, free from hatred and ill will. And he dwells, letting his mind fill with compassion, with joy, with equanimity, pervade 1 quarter, 2nd, 3rd, 4th quarter, extensive, developed, measureless, free from hatred and ill will. What do you think, Nigroda? Is the higher austerity purified by these things or not? And Nigroda says, certainly it is, Lord. It attains its peak there, penetrating to the pith. And the Buddha said, no, Nigroda, it does not attain its peak there. It has only penetrated to the inner bark. And Nigroda asked, well then, Lord, how does austerity attain its peak, penetrating to the pith? It would be good if the Blessed Lord were to cause my austerity to attain its peak, to penetrate to the pith. Stop here for a moment. You can see from here, the Buddha is very skillful. Basically, the Buddha wants to teach this Nigroda the real holy path, which is the charana, the practice of the holy life, the conduct of the holy life. But if he were to tell him straight away, this ascetic won't accept it so easily. He's so used to the ascetic practices, torturing himself. He thinks that's the highest. So the Buddha leads him to see that even if you practice all these austerities, there are certain faults in it. And from there, the Buddha tells him how to go to a higher stage, and then a higher stage. So now the Buddha is leading him into the real holy path. Nigroda, take the case of a self-mortifier who observes the fourfold restraint, free from hatred and ill will. He recalls various past lives. There my name was so and so, my caste was so and so. I experienced such and such painful conditions, pleasant and painful conditions. Having passed from there, stop it for a moment. So here actually, as mentioned in Sutta number 1, verse 131, it must be the charana, the conduct, the various stages, practicing sila, contentment, seclusion, sati sampajanya, mindfulness, and clear awareness, then the other things, and then abandoning the 5 hindrances, attaining the 4 jhanas, and then come to this psychic powers, remembering past lives. Having passed from there, arose here. Thus he remembers various past lives, the conditions and details. What do you think, Nigroda? Is the higher austerity purified by these things or not? And Nigroda said, certainly it is, Lord. It attains its peak there, penetrating to the pith. And the Buddha said, no, Nigroda, it only reaches the fibers surrounding the pith. Stop here for a moment. A lot of people think in the holy path, once you attain psychic power, that's the highest. But to the Buddha, it is not. And then Nigroda asked, well then, Lord, how does austerity reach its peak, penetrating to the pith? It would be good if the Blessed Lord were to cause my austerity to attain its peak, to penetrate to the pith. And the Buddha said, well, Nigroda, take the case of a self-mortifier who observes the fourfold restraint, etc., etc., and then free from hatred and ill will. He remembers various past lives, their conditions and details. And then with the purified divine eye, he sees beings passing away and arising, base and noble, well-favored and ill-favored, to happy and unhappy destinations as karma directs them. What do you think, Nigroda? Is the higher austerity purified by these things or not? And he said, certainly it is, Lord. It attains its peak there, penetrating to the pith. And then the Buddha said, so indeed it is, Nigroda, that austerity is so purified as to reach its peak and penetrate to the pith. I think here they miss out, must be the another one, is that after this seeing beings taking rebirth according to karma, then the destruction of the asavas, contemplating the 4 noble truths, and destroying the asavas, which also means enlightenment or liberation from the round of rebirths. And then only it has penetrated to the pith, reached its peak. And so, Nigroda, when you ask, what Lord is this doctrine in which the Blessed Lord trains His disciples, and which those disciples whom He has so trained as to benefit from it, recognize as their principal support and the perfection of the holy life? I say that it is by something far more reaching and excellent that I train them, through which they recognize as their principal support and the perfection of the holy life. At this the wanderers made a great commotion and noise, exclaiming, we and our teacher are ruined. We know of nothing higher or more far-reaching than our teaching. And when the householder Sandana realized these wanderers of other views are actually listening and attending to the Lord's words and inclining their minds to the higher wisdom, he said to Nigroda, Reverend Nigroda, you said to me, come now, householder, do you know whom the ascetic Gautama talks to, etc., etc.? His wisdom is destroyed by the solitary life. He is no good at conversation. He is right out of touch, etc. So now that the Blessed Lord has come here, why don't you baffle him with a single question and knock him over like an empty pot? And at these words, Nigroda was silent and upset. His shoulders drooped. He hung his head and sat there downcast and bewildered. Stop here for a moment. So you see, the Buddha was explaining all this in great detail from the practice of simple self-torture, austerities, and slowly leading up to the sila precepts, and then the other factors of charana, the holy life, culminating in the 4 jhanas, and then the psychic powers, and then liberation from samsara. And these Nigroda's disciples, these other wanderers, they said, we and our teacher are ruined. We know of nothing higher and more far-reaching than our teaching. You know why they say this? Because then they realize that the Buddha's teaching is so high. So many steps more to go, but they are only at the bottom, only cultivating self-torture only. Haven't even started the holy life. Then they said, then they realize we are ruined. We know nothing more than only what our teachers have told us. So this Sandana was very happy to realize these wanderers are really listening to the Buddha. So, seeing the state he was in, the Lord said, is it true, Nigroda, that you said that? And he said, Lord, it is true that I said that, foolishly, mistakenly, and wickedly. And the Buddha said, what do you think, Nigroda? Have you ever heard it said by wanderers who were aged, venerable, the teachers of teachers, that those who in the past were arahants, sammasambuddhas, used to talk when they came together by shouting and screaming and making a great clamor and indulging in unedifying conversation, the way you and your teachers do? Or did they not say rather that those blessed ones sought lodging in the forest, in the depths of the jungle, free from noise, with little sound, far from the madding crowd, undisturbed by men, well fitted for seclusion, just as I do now? And Nigroda said, Lord, I have heard it said that those who were arahants, sammasambuddhas, did not indulge in loud talk, etc., but sought lodging in the forest, just as the blessed Lord does now. And the Buddha said, Nigroda, you are an intelligent man of mature years. Did it never occur to you to think the blessed Lord is enlightened and teaches a doctrine of enlightenment? He is self-restrained and teaches a doctrine of self-restraint. He is calm and teaches a doctrine of calm. He has gone beyond and teaches a doctrine of going beyond. He has gained Nibbana and teaches a doctrine for the gaining of Nibbana. At this, Nigroda said to the Lord, transgression overcame me, Lord, foolish, blind, and evil as I was, that I spoke thus of the Lord. May the Lord accept my confession of this fault, that I may restrain myself in future. And the Buddha said, indeed, Nigroda, transgression overcame you when through folly, blindness, and evil you spoke thus of me. But since you recognize the nature of your transgression and make amends as is right, we accept your confession. For Nigroda, it is a mark of progress in the discipline of the noble ones, if anyone recognizes the nature of his transgression and makes amends as is right, restraining himself for the future. But Nigroda, I tell you this, let an intelligent man come to me who is sincere, honest and straightforward, and I will instruct him. I will teach him Dhamma. If he practices what he is taught, then within 7 years he will attain in this life to that unequaled holy life and goal, for the sake of which young men of good family go forth from the household life into homelessness. By his own knowledge and realization, and he will abide therein. Let alone 7 years, in 6 years, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 year, let alone 1 year, in 11 months, 10 months, 7 months, 6 months, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 month, half a month, let alone half a month. In 7 days he can gain that goal. Nigroda, you may think the ascetic Gautama says this in order to get disciples, but you should not regard it like that. Let him who is your teacher remain your teacher. Or you may think he wants us to abandon our rules, but you should not regard it like that. Let your rules remain as they are. Or you may think he wants us to abandon our way of life, but you should not regard it like that. Let your way of life remain as it was. Or you may think he wants to establish us in the doing of things that according to our teaching are wrong and are so considered among us. But you should not regard it like that. Let those things you consider wrong continue to be so considered. Or you may think he wants to draw us away from things that according to our teaching are good and are so considered among us. But you should not regard it like that. Let whatever you consider right continue to be so considered. Nigroda, I do not speak for any of these reasons. There are nigroda, unwholesome things or unwholesome states that have not been abandoned, tainted, conducive to rebirth, fearful, productive of painful results in the future, associated with birth, decay and death. It is for the abandonment of these things that I teach Dhamma. If you practice accordingly, these tainted states will be abandoned, and the states that make for purification will develop and grow, and you will all attain to and dwell in this very life by your own insight and realization in the fullness of perfected wisdom. At these words, the wanderers sat silent and upset. Their shoulders drooped. They hung their heads and sat there downcast and bewildered. So possessed were their minds by Mara. Then the Lord said, every one of these foolish men is possessed by the evil one, so that not a single one of them thinks, let us now follow the holy life proclaimed by the ascetic Gotama, that we may learn it. For what do 7 days matter? Then the Lord, having uttered his lion's roar in the Udumbarika Park, rose up in the air and alighted on the vulture's peak. And the householder Sandana also returned to Rajagaha. It's the end of the sutta. So you see this last part, the Buddha is hinting to them, if you are an honest, let an intelligent man come to me who is sincere, honest and straightforward, and I will instruct him, I will teach him Dhamma. So the Buddha is inviting them to come to be his disciples, and he is telling them, in 7 days, if they strive hard, they can become enlightened. But their minds were overcome by Mara, and they did not take the hint that the Buddha dropped. So the Buddha flew off in the air just to show them. He didn't realize if they followed the Buddha, they can also fly off like the Buddha. Okay, I think we have time for another sutta.